Welcome back to We Want Picks. I'm Artem MMA and I'm going to be breaking down the Contender Series for week number 2 of the 2024 season. Week number 1 started off with a bang. It was a fantastic card, and then we saw 4 contracts being given out. We saw a few finishes go down as well, and some massive finishes, especially in that flyweight fight. I went 4-1 on the picks. I did get one pick wrong, and unfortunately it wasn't a very good one. I did pick Ming Ding to win that fight, but we do move on, and we can move on now to week number 2, which is an interesting card. I will be honest, a couple of these fights I do have very low confidence in, but also a couple of these fights I have pretty high confidence in as well. I do think that it also does have the potential to have a lot of finishes, and I am also predicting a lot of knockouts to happen as well, so hopefully that does end up happening and we might see another fantastic week of Contender Series. I do have an article up for week number 2 as well, and my picks are going up in article form prior to these videos being put out on the WeWantPicks.com website. If you do sign up, you do of course get access to my articles that I write every single week about the PFL, about other non-UFC promotions, and of course about the Contender Series, and also access to all of Angelo and Jacob's bets and analysis for the UFC cards as well. So there's a lot of value there for $10 per month, and if you do sign up using my code ARTEM, you do get a 3-day free trial. And of course, with all that being said, let's now get into my predictions. And kicking off the card is going to be another one of those pretty low confidence picks that I did mention in the intro. Billy Brand is fighting against Cody Haddon here at bantamweight, and these two guys have something in common, and that is that they have both got very, very tough wars in the regional scene against very established UFC fighters. For Cody Haddon, he gave Steve Erceg, a former UFC title challenger at flyweight, one of the toughest fights of his career. And then for Billy Brand, he gave the current and future potential UFC superstar Peyton Talbot a very, very tough fight, and you can watch that on YouTube. It's got quite a few views. I think Peyton Talbot actually uploaded it himself to his own YouTube channel. But one thing that I do want to say about this fight, and I feel like maybe this fight and also last week could highlight a potential way to make a lot of money on the Contender Series this year on the underdogs, is by getting in early. The odds for this fight dropped a few days ago. If you do follow fightodds.io on Twitter, I believe it's just an automated system where as soon as the odds drop, they post on Twitter, and I believe it was DRAFTKINGS that got the first odds for this fight. And Cody Haddon opened as a plus 165 underdog, and if you look at him right now, he is a minus 165 favorite, and Billy Brand is now as wide as plus 155. So the odds have completely flipped. And last week, looking at week number 1, Mansour Abdul Malik actually opened as the underdog in his matchup against Wes Schultz and closed about minus 400, which is just crazy line movement. So definitely something to keep an eye out there. I feel like maybe if you want to get in on some of these underdogs, you might have to get in a little bit early. As I did say though, this is a close fight. I do see this as a mirror matchup. I think it's very competitive on either side. Both guys, I think, are also very similar styles as well. Billy Brand and Cody Haddon are both small for bantamweight. They're both quite small for the weight class, but they are very fast for the weight class, and I feel like that's kind of what makes up for their lack of size in the fights. Billy Brand has a Muay Thai background. You can tell by watching his fights as he does have very good movement, very good leg kicks, very good body kicks, and he does target that downstairs area in the body and the legs quite well to slow down the movement of his opponents, and that could really come in handy when taking on a guy like Cody Haddon. Billy Brand can wrestle as well, and he has looked to go to some offensive wrestling quite recently in some of his more recent matchups for Uriah Favor's A1 Combat, which I think is a fantastic promotion, and I do rate them pretty highly. Cody Haddon, on the other hand, is also a pretty young prospect. He's only going to be 25, nearly 26 years old coming into this fight, and he's of course been fighting over in Australia. Since losing to Steve Erceg, he has built his name up against a couple of pretty decent guys, a couple of experienced guys in his more recent ones, but he did take on the pretty up-and-coming at the time, and still up-and-coming, Jarrett Wilbraham, who was a pretty talented grappler who was able to give him a pretty good test in that matchup. And Cody Haddon has looked also to go to his wrestling and his grappling, and I feel like that is potentially where he's going to need to go in this matchup against Billy Brand, because I was watching Billy Brand's tape and I was thinking, man, this is a really tough fight for Cody Haddon, because it is, but there is still a couple of potential weaknesses that could be exploited in the matchup. Billy Brand does get hit on occasion, and Haddon is going to be one of the better strikers, aside from Peyton Talbot, of course, that he has been fighting against. And Cody Haddon, in my opinion, has more potential to find more success with the offensive wrestling. So I think that's something that we could see go into this matchup as well. But I will say that Billy Brand is an underdog pick. I think that's a very good underdog pick. But I am going to have to slightly lean, ever so slightly, with a very low confidence pick, go with Cody Haddon in this fight. I think it is going to go all 3 rounds, and both guys are very much finishers with a lot of KOs. But I think that we do see this fight go all 3 rounds. I think it's going to be a potential war. I think it's going to be a fantastic fight to watch, but I'm going to lean the slight favorite, Cody Haddon, who opened up as a big underdog to win by decision. And it looks like a lot of Tapology are on the Haddon side as well, but I think that that fight is a lot closer than those voter votes suggest. Now Cam Rowston will be fighting against Torrez Finney, and if you are unfamiliar with Torrez Finney is massive. He's 5'8", but he is just a gigantic dude. He did fight on the Contender Series last year. You can kind of see from his photo there how big of a guy this guy really is for a 5'8" middleweight. He did fight on the Contender Series last year against another wrestler in Yuri Pantvarov, and for some reason he didn't get the contract. I think it was kind of an odd decision, because looking back at it, he actually found a lot of success against Yuri Pantvarov. Only about 15 seconds into the fight, he picks up Pantvarov, throws him up over his shoulders, and then slams him down to the ground, and does it a couple of times, lands some pretty decent ground and pound, and then ends up finding the submission pretty early into the second round. I didn't think that it was a boring fight, really, and I didn't really think that Pantvarov was able to expose any major holes in Finney's game, so I didn't really understand the decision to not sign him. He did come back relatively recently against another veteran in Tyson Jeffries, and went viral for a brutal KO win. It was a big overhand that slipped Tyson Jeffries pretty badly, and now he's going to be back here on the Contender Series. Torrez Finney, as I did say, he is a wrestler, but I feel like he probably does rely on his strength quite a bit, because his wrestling style isn't, I guess, kind of like a traditional sort of MMA wrestling style that you do see. He really does go out there and try and pick people up over his shoulders and slam them down to the ground, where he can land some good ground and pound, and also showed off some pretty good offensive pure grappling in the submission against another grappler, Yuri Pantvarov. Cam Rowston's like the opposite. He's a 6'2" striker fighting out of City Kickboxing, and he has actually won King in the Ring tournaments, which are an 8-man kickboxing tournament that takes place in New Zealand. And if you guys may or may not know, like, very good kickboxers win these tournaments. Carlos Olberg won those tournaments. Neverho Sterling, who's also going to be on the Contender Series later in the year, won those tournaments. And that does tell you that Cam Rowston striking is very legitimate. It is very good. But I do still somewhat worry a little bit about his MMA game, because he hasn't necessarily fought all that much recently. I mean, he has fought quite a lot, since 2019, but as of very recently, he hasn't fought since 2022. It's been a couple of years, and even then it was against a guy with a losing record in Pane Haraki, I should say, who was 3-6 at the time. And then, if you do look at the general overall level of competition, it hasn't really been too good. Now, I don't necessarily like to do this, but I did go all the way back, of course, to a little bit earlier on into his MMA career, and I watched his fight against Isi Fikatefu, which is actually a pretty similar stylistic matchup to this one, as Isi Fikatefu is a very powerful, yet short wrestler, I should say, who was able to find a lot of success against Cam Rowston. He was able to take down Cam Rowston, and ended up landing a massive overhand that knocked out Cam Rowston pretty badly. I do understand I'm looking all the way back in 2018 now, which is 6 years ago, and of course Cam Rowston has found success since then and has improved since then, but I did find it interesting that he did struggle to a shorter wrestler earlier on into his career, and well, that's a very similar matchup to what he's going to have to deal with now. Rowston, as I did say, is a very good kickboxer. He's got a very good kickboxing background. He's going to have some fantastic training partners in the kickboxing world, but I just don't know if he's going to be able to defend the takedowns of Torrez Finney. Yuri Pantvarov, who is a wrestler that Matt Serra was very high on. He was on Dana White's Looking for a Fight, I believe, just a few months before the Contender Series took place, and Matt Serra was talking about him, and Pantvarov couldn't defend the takedowns of Torrez Finney, And now I'm thinking, can Rowston defend the takedowns of Torrez Finney? And I think the answer is no. I just don't necessarily see him being able to deal with Finney. Now, what he could definitely do is, if he can keep the fight on the feet, outstrike Torrez Finney from range, because Finney's striking isn't very technical. It really is just very powerful boxing to close the distance and to get the takedown. But ultimately, I just can't see the takedown defense holding up against such a powerful and short opponent as well, who's already going to be able to easily get down and drive into his position to get the big takedown. So I do like Finney in this fight. He's a massive favorite at minus 360. Cam Rowston's a big plus 285 underdog. I do think Finney gets it done, and I do think he does find a finish as well, using some ground and pound, or maybe a submission in this fight. So I do like Finney to find a ground and pound TKO. And now we have a very interesting matchup in Cortavious Romious fighting against Michael Imperato. This is also a matchup taking place at bantamweight against guys who do have a somewhat similar style, I guess you could say, whereas I would say that Cortavious Romious is much more of a striker out of the two. Michael Imperato is definitely more so a grappler, and I would almost say he is kind of like a pure grappler. If you do watch Michael Imperato's fights, he doesn't really throw too much volume on the feet. I guess what he does have is a very high guard and leg kicks. That is probably his best weapon on the feet, is his leg kicks, but ultimately where he wants the fight is on the ground. And he has actually proven in his fights that he's willing to get taken down to get the fights down to the ground, where he gets taken down in all 3 rounds against his opponent here in Musa Tolliver and ends up winning the fight on his back by throwing up submissions and also a little bit of ground and pound on bottom, because Musa Tolliver takes him down and literally does nothing. And then he does get a massive win against Ricky Bandejas, who is a former Bellator fighter who actually had a couple, I think 3 actually viral KO wins in Bellator. We were able to see Imperato get a very quick and easy submission win over Bandejas as a massive underdog in front of Dana White on Dana White's Looking for a Fight. Cortavious Romious, I feel like, is a similar matchup or similar fighter, but also very different in the same way, because he is also a grappler. He is also a guy that is going to want the fight, to get the fight down to the ground, except I think he is a little bit more comfortable on the feet. On the feet, he is very aggressive, for better or for worse, where he will just kind of rush forward, throwing combinations and bomb away, trying to land big shots. But he does leave himself very open in those moments, and I feel like a perfect example is actually his loss to Romious. And yes, the fight does only last 29 seconds, but what happens is Cortavious Romious does exactly what he always does, and he runs forward, throwing his combinations, and both of those guys just started swinging in the pocket and landing combinations in the pocket, and of course Romious ended up getting the knockout in 29 seconds and ended up winning the fight. We have a very quick win for Cortavious Romious after that, but prior to that, the same sort of thing happened here against this opponent, Nate Williams. Cortavious Romious, like 20 seconds into the fight, runs forward, throwing his combinations, throwing his hooks, super aggressive, lands big shots on Nate Williams, and Nate Williams actually ends up getting a takedown, but Romious gets the submission from bottom. So I feel like on the feet, I do have to favor Cortavious Romious just because of the comfortability that he does have on the feet. He is just going to be a lot more aggressive. Imperato is pretty low volume when it does come to the striking, but when it does come to the pure grappling, I do think that is where things can get interesting, as both guys are very opportunistic grapplers. Cortavious Romious is going to throw up submissions from back. Michael Imperato has proven that he is going to throw up submissions from back as well. And I think it just kind of comes down to, does the grappling even happen? And I feel like Cortavious Romious, and just kind of the way that he fights, probably won't look to grapple in this matchup. And I think he should be able to keep the fight on the feet and defend some takedowns. So I do like Romious in this one here. He is 5'4", so he's a pretty short guy for 135, but he still is pretty well built. And I do think that eventually he probably will land a shot in this one here. So I do like Romious. He's a very big favorite though, minus 300, but I do think that he should be able to have a good opportunity in this matchup here. And I think he does win by knockout if he is to find a finish. And now we have Rizvan Kuniev fighting against Hugo Cunha. I think that Kuniev should be better everywhere, and I say that and watch him have a poor performance, because heavyweights are very difficult to predict. But the thing about Rizvan Kuniev is that I feel like he is like a level above a lot of heavyweights in general, and he probably could have been signed to the UFC in 2021 and probably would have been a pretty good decision because he actually has proven since then to be a world-class heavyweight, getting a win over former UFC fighter Anthony Hamilton, even though I think he was about 43 years old at the time, at Eagle FC, which was Khabib Nurmagomedov's promotion, and won the title there. And then he goes out there and wins against Renan Ferreira. But there is a pretty big asterisk there because there are four different anabolic steroids there. Like that's a lot. You know, I don't know much about this sort of thing, but that's a lot. And Rizvan Kuniev did defeat Renan Ferreira. And if you guys are unfamiliar with Renan Ferreira actually went on to win the championship in the 2023 season, which that loss happened, and he's now going to be fighting against Francis Ngannou. So, although Kuniev did win the fight with a huge asterisk on the fight, he won the fight, and now that win has aged incredibly well. Now, I do assume that the PFL released him after that test failure, I guess you could word it in that way, and now he's going to be back on the Contender Series, and there isn't really any evidence to suggest that now he's going to look completely different, because I did try and look through his Instagram, and it does still seem like he is training with some top level guys. It does still seem like he is in pretty decent shape, but Kuniev's good. I don't think I've even started talking about his fighting style yet. Kuniev is a very comfortable striker, and that is going to be the complete opposite in this matchup against Hugo Cunha. Rizvan Kuniev in his matchup against Renan Ferreira was actually pressuring Renan Ferreira back pretty well and was landing pretty decent strikes against him, and was also able to find the takedowns, find the control on top, and then find the success. The win against Anthony Hamilton was just a guillotine up against the cage, and against Estevan Santos he was able to show once again pretty decent, well-rounded games, but he did get the finish, but he didn't get the contract. Hugo Cunha is a wrestler, and that's kind of it. He doesn't really present too much more, aside from actually some pretty decent grappling for heavyweight. On the feet, he is very uncomfortable though, and then I think that has been proven in actually every single one of his fights. On the feet, he does absolutely nothing. In his fight against Eduardo Neves, he didn't shoot for a single takedown until the second round, which is absolutely insane to me. And it took for Eduardo Neves to drop him in the second round for then Cunha to actually end up reversing a position that Neves was in, because he dropped Cunha, was on top of Cunha, and then Cunha reversed the position to get on top and then worked for his takedown, and eventually the arm triangle choke on top position from there. It took for him to get dropped to go for a takedown, and he's a national wrestling champion, and Eduardo Neves is a pretty short but very powerful striker who's been on the Contender Series twice. And then, of course, against Dustin Johnson, it was a close fight, but Dustin Johnson is another pretty tall, rangy striker, and he was just able to land more volume. And honestly, from what I've seen, Rizvan Kuniev is comfortable on the feet, and he's a decent wrestler as well. So I think that this is just kind of Kuniev's fights to lose. I do like Kuniev a lot to win this one. I do worry that it's going to be potentially a boring 3-round fight, but Kuniev being minus 600 and also not getting the contract a few years ago, maybe we see him with a little bit more motivation to find a finish. And I am actually going to pick Rizvan Kuniev here to win by finish, by ground and pound in the second round. He had Renan Ferreira in pretty tough positions where Renan Ferreira could have potentially been finished by strikes. And I think that Hugo Cunha hasn't really proven to be like the Renan Ferreira, the guy that won the 2023 PFL Championship and is now fighting Francis Ngannou. So I think we are going to see Rizvan Kuniev go out there and find a finish, a ground and pound TKO, and if he does get signed to the UFC, although there is a very big asterisk there, I think that he does still have a very decent skill set for heavyweight. Now we can move on to the main event, a fight that is guaranteed chaos, and a fight that I am very, very nervous about, because this is my lowest confidence pick on the card, and it's like a 51%, 49% situation. In fact, I'm so not confident in this pick, I've actually been asking other people for their opinion on this fight, because it could go either way. And the reason why it could go either way is because somebody on either side could get knocked out at any time, and that is why it is going to be a banger. And that is why I'm really, really looking forward to the fight. Both of these guys are older prospects, as per se. Pytlik is 35 years old, and Andreas Gustafsson is 33 years old. So both guys definitely kind of getting up there in age, and Dana White will probably do a speech saying that he doesn't normally sign 34-year-old prospects, this and that, but both of these guys are very, very fun fighters to watch, and they kind of fight in slightly different styles. Pytlik typically has a pretty decent size advantage and range advantage over his opponents at 170 pounds. He might even be slightly taller than 6'1", because when you do watch him there, he definitely does have a pretty sizable length advantage, and he uses it very well. The way that Pytlik wants to fight is that he wants to control the center of the octagon, and he wants to throw straight shots down the middle. He will throw the occasional overhand when the opportunity arises, and he will throw his straight shots, whether that is push kicks to keep his opponents at bay, whether that is jabs to keep his opponents at bay, or even sometimes he will get a little bit aggressive and then throw a combination, and then of course throw the hooks and overhands as he does close the distance. He's got a lot of power, 9 wins by knockout, but there is a little bit of, I guess, kind of question marks on his career in some ways, and what I mean by that is that he did take a near 4-year gap between his loss to Jake Lindsay and then his return to Mike Hill, and then his big win over Ryan Leininger, who he defeated in front of Dana White at Dana White's Looking for a Fight. In this one here against Jake Lindsay, I looked into it, and it turns out that he actually injured his back prior to the matchup against Jake Lindsay, and then decided to still fight anyway, even though he probably should have pulled out of the fight. And then when he lost, he, I believe, aggravated that back injury, or maybe it was a neck injury, even worse. So he had to sit out for a long period of time because of that. But then what happened was he had a couple of other bad things happen to him, so he kind of put MMA to the side and then focused on his career. He got a good job, he kind of settled into a pretty decent family situation. But then when COVID happened, he actually found love for MMA again, and that is why he made his return a couple of years ago against Mike Hill, and then won again recently. So that's the reasoning for that big 4-year gap, because I'm sure a lot of people, including myself, were very confused about that. Andreas Gustafsson on the other side is a maniac, man. If you guys want to watch some fun tape, watch Andreas Gustafsson's tape, because win or lose, this guy's fights are incredibly fun, and I actually highly recommend watching his fight against Tony Lampinen, because both of those guys show off incredible chins in that matchup. And you would look at Tony Lampinen's career and you would think, this guy can't have a chin. He's got 6 TKO losses. Gustafsson was landing massive combinations on this guy, and Lampinen wouldn't go away. And Lampinen was landing massive combinations on him, and he wouldn't go away. And now you're probably thinking, that's a guy with many losses on his record. That's a guy that doesn't have a very good record, and he's going to war with him. How is he going to deal with someone like Pytlik? And that's where the lack of confidence comes into. Andreas Gustafsson's style is being incredibly dangerous. He's a massive guy for this weight class. I actually think he's going to be even bigger than Pytlik. He's huge, and he uses that size advantage very well. The way that he fights is he rushes forward, and he does like to clinch up quite a bit, but he does use that size advantage to a lot of his success. But the problem is when he rushes forward, and he's landing, and he's standing in the pocket, and he's throwing these massive bombs, he's getting hit. He's going to war with, in my opinion, much, much lesser strikers than Pytlik. But the thing about Gustafsson is, I don't think he's going to get knocked out. And that's what it comes down to, is I think that Gustafsson is going to be moving forward. I think he's going to be going forward and kind of having to fight through the fire in this matchup, and he's just not going to go down. And you see his fight against Tony Lampinen, he gets cut open brutally, and the doctor comes in multiple times, and he's just still going. And then he fights against this guy, Dominic Shover. The fight only lasts 10 seconds, the fastest KO in this promotion's history, FCR 18. And what happens is Gustafsson just kind of runs forward, throws this massive overhand right hook, and his opponent just kind of ducks his head, and he just lands it in the perfect spot and puts him down with a couple of ground and pound strikes. Of course, he did fight against Jordan Nutabak, which is now in the UFC, but he's kind of not at the same time. It's a very, very difficult situation to deal with there, but in that matchup, Nutabak kind of just was just a little bit better on the feet. Gustafsson is massive though, and I do think that in this matchup, He's going to close the distance against Pytlik, but the thing is, I can see Pytlik fighting at range and landing big shots from range against Gustafsson with the push kicks, with the jabs, with the straight shots. But I think that it is ultimately going to come down to Andreas Gustafsson just kind of not giving up, just not being able to be put away. And I think eventually he's going to be able to close that gap and close that distance and land the big shot on Pytlik. As I did say though, incredibly low confidence pick. Anyone can get KO'd here, and I think that massive underdog, you can get Pytlik as a plus 210 underdog. And honestly, I really wanted to just pick Pytlik to pick an underdog, because I haven't picked an underdog yet in the season, even though guys that I have picked opened as underdogs, they're not closing as underdogs, so does it really count? But I've always said it, and I'll say it again, I never pick fights based on odds. I pick fights based on who I think is going to win. But if you wanted to go dog hunting and you wanted to hunt for some underdogs, Pytlik probably is the best underdog on the season, of the card, sorry, I should say. And I think that Billy Brand is also a very good underdog as well if you wanted to go down that route. But I'm going to pick Gustafsson. He is the pick. I think he does end up landing a KO blow. Once again, these Tapology votes are kind of insane. This fight is a lot closer than that. But with all of that being said, let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree with all of my picks? Do you disagree with some of my picks? Let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next one.